The crystal chandelier in the foyer didn't flicker, but the air in the room suddenly felt like it had been sucked out by a vacuum. It was 11:14 p.m. The silence of the mansion was shattered not by an argument, but by the heavy rhythmic click of stiletto heels against the Italian marble. My husband, Dominic Toretto, didn't look at me as he walked through the door. He was too busy adjusting the silk lapel of his blazer, his face a mask of cold indifference. Behind him stood a woman draped in crimson silk, her eyes scanning our home like she already owned the deed to the land. "This is Sloane, Elena," Dominic said, his voice as flat as a tombstone. "She's moving into the East Wing. I expect you to be accommodating. We are all adults here. It's time we learned to coexist." The betrayal wasn't the mistress. It was the demand for my silence in the face of my own replacement. For 10 years, I had been the silent pillar of the Toretto legacy, the woman who polished the tarnished edges of his reputation. But as I looked at the smug curve of Sloane's lips, something shifted. The perfect wife died in that foyer. In her place, a cold, calculating clarity took hold. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply reached into my pocket, tapped a pre-written message on my phone and hit send. "Coexistence," I whispered, the word tasting like copper. I couldn't agree more, Dominic. In fact, I felt the house was a bit empty myself. So I've invited a guest of my own. He should be here any moment. Dominic's brow furrowed, his ego momentarily bruised by the lack of tears. Sloane laughed, a sharp, grating sound, but it died in her throat when the heavy oak front doors swung open again. A man stood framed in the moonlight, his silhouette tall, broad, and terrifyingly still. He wore a suit that cost more than Dominic's car, but he carried the aura of someone who knew exactly how to dismantle a life with a single phone call. The moment the light hit his face, the color drained from Sloane's cheeks. She didn't just gasp, she let out a guttural, primal scream that echoed off the high ceilings, her body trembling so violently she nearly tripped over her own feet. "You," she choked out, her eyes bulging with a terror so deep it looked like she had seen her own ghost. "Hello, Sloane," the man said, his voice a low, melodic rumble that sent a shiver of pure ice down my spine. "It's been a very long time. I believe you owe me something." Dominic looked between his mistress and the stranger, his face reddening with a mix of confusion and rising fear. He didn't realize that by bringing a wolf into our home, he had inadvertently invited the hunter. Who was this man? Why did the woman who thought she had won everything suddenly look like she was facing a death sentence? And more importantly, what was I willing to sacrifice to see this game to its end? Before we dive into the dark secrets hidden within these walls, I want to take a moment to say hello to all of you watching. Whether you're joining us from the rainy streets of London, the sun-drenched coasts of Australia, or right here in the heart of the city, it is truly wonderful to have you here. How are you all doing today? I hope you're holding your loved ones close because, as Elena is about to find out, trust is the most expensive thing you can ever give. If you're enjoying this story and want to see how this high-stakes game of revenge unfolds, please take a second to hit that subscribe button and join our community. It helps us keep bringing these emotional journeys to life. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love reading your stories as much as you love hearing mine. The stranger stepped into the light, his eyes fixed solely on Sloane. The game hadn't just changed. The board had been flipped, and for the first time in a decade, I wasn't the one being played. The atmosphere in the grand foyer was no longer just tense. It was radioactive. Dominic stood frozen, his hand still resting possessively on Sloane's arm, but his grip had gone slack. My husband was a man who thrived on control. He was the CEO of Toretto Enterprises, a man who moved markets with a whisper. He was used to being the most formidable person in any room, but as he looked at the guest I had summoned, I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen in 12 years of marriage. Genuine, unadulterated doubt. The stranger, Jordan Belfort, didn't move. He didn't need to. He stood with the relaxed posture of a predator who knew the exit was blocked. His eyes, a piercing icy blue, were locked onto Sloane, who was currently hyperventilating against the marble pillar. Jordan wasn't just a guest. To the world, he was a billionaire venture capitalist with a reputation for cleaning up messes that the law couldn't touch. To me, he was the man who had saved my life once before, long before I became the trophy wife to a man who didn't deserve me. "Elena," Dominic finally hissed, his voice cracking. "Who the hell is this? Why is he in my house?" I stepped forward, my silk robe billowing around my ankles like smoke. For years my deepest desire had been simple: to be seen. Not as a social accessory, not as the woman who organized charity galas, but as a partner. My fear, however, had always been the crushing weight of the Toretto name, the idea that if I ever left I would disappear into nothingness. But tonight that fear had evaporated. "This is Jordan," I said calmly, smoothing a stray hair from my forehead. "He's an old friend. And since you've decided our home is now an open house for your acquaintances, I thought it only fair I reconnect with mine. Jordan is going to be staying in the guest suite. The one right next to yours and Sloane's." Sloane made a whimpering sound. She was a beautiful woman, sharp features, honey blonde hair, and a body that suggested she spent more time in a gym than at a desk. But the glamorous Mistress facade was gone. She looked like a cornered animal. "Jordan, you remember Sloane, don't you?" I asked, my voice dripping with forced sweetness. Jordan's lips pulled back into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, we go back a long way. Though back then she went by the name Shelby. And she was much better at running than she is now." The mention of the name Shelby caused Sloane to let out a small, broken sob. She turned to Dominic, her hands trembling as she grabbed his blazer. "Dominic, please. He can't stay here. You don't understand, he's dangerous. Make him leave." Dominic looked at his mistress, then at the towering presence of Jordan, and finally at me. He was trying to calculate the social and financial cost of a scene. He hated scandals. He lived for the image of the perfect, powerful family. "Elena, a word." "Now," Dominic commanded, pointing toward the study. "I think not, Dominic," I replied, my heart hammering against my ribs, though I kept my face like stone. "I'm tired. It's been a long day of preparing for your new guest. I'm going to bed. Jordan, the staff has already moved your luggage in. Please make yourself at home." As I turned to walk up the grand staircase, I felt 3 pairs of eyes on my back. Jordan's gaze was a protective weight, Sloane's was a jagged blade of terror, and Dominic's was a burning brand of fury. But there was someone else in the house that no one was thinking about. Alfred Pennyworth, our longtime butler and the only person who truly knew the depths of my loneliness. As I passed him in the upstairs hallway, he gave me a nearly imperceptible nod. Alfred had seen the bruises, the emotional ones that leave no marks but run deeper than bone. He had been the one to help me track down Jordan. He was the silent witness to the war that was about to begin. I entered my bedroom, the one I had shared with Dominic for a decade, and locked the door. My secret wasn't just that I knew Jordan. It was that I knew why Sloane was afraid of him. I knew what she had stolen, and I knew who she had betrayed to get to Dominic's side. In this house of mirrors, everyone was hiding something. Dominic was hiding his crumbling offshore accounts. Sloane was hiding a criminal past, and I was hiding the fact that I no longer cared if the house burned down as long as I was the one holding the match. I sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the muffled shouting coming from downstairs. The coexistence Dominic wanted was about to become a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. And as the clock struck midnight, I realized that for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of the dark. I was the dark. The sun rose over the Toretto estate with a deceptive tranquility, casting long golden fingers across the manicured lawns. But inside, the air was thick with the scent of expensive coffee and unexploded bombs. I descended the stairs at 8 a.m. dressed in a sharp ivory power suit, a stark contrast to the morning black I had felt like wearing for years. I walked into the breakfast nook to find a scene pulled straight from a psychological thriller. Dominic sat at the head of the table, white-knuckling a silver fork. To his left, Sloane sat huddled in a silk robe, her eyes bloodshot and her makeup from the night before smeared like war paint. And at the other end, looking entirely too comfortable, sat Jordan. He was reading the financial papers and sipping espresso as if he hadn't just upended our lives. "Good morning, everyone," I said, my voice bright and brittle. "I hope everyone slept well. The East Wing can be a bit drafty." Dominic slammed his hand on the table, the china rattling. "Enough, Elena. This farce ends now. I don't care who this man is or what friendship you're claiming. I want him out of my house by noon or I'm calling security." Jordan didn't even look up from the paper. "You could do that, Dominic. But I suspect the local authorities would be very interested in the $40 million that leaked from your construction firm's pension fund last quarter. The paper trail is quite winding. But I have a very good map." The color drained from Dominic's face, turning a sickly shade of gray. He looked at me, then at Jordan, his mouth hanging open. He was a man built on secrets, and he had just realized he was sitting across from a human safecracker. But it was what happened next that truly launched the nightmare. The heavy front door chimes rang again. Alfred approached, his face uncharacteristically pale. "Sir, madam, there is a gentleman here. He says he's with the insurance underwriters for the Toretto vault." Sloane let out a sharp, audible gasp. Her fork clattered to the floor. A man stepped into the dining room, Ethan Hunt, a sharp-eyed investigator with a demeanor that suggested he spent his life looking through people's lies. He wasn't there for the pension fund. He was there because the Cullinan tears, a set of heirloom diamonds worth $15 million that had been in the Toretto family for generations, had been reported stolen from the home's high-security vault just 20 minutes ago. "The vault was opened with a biometric override," Ethan said, his eyes scanning the room, lingering just a second too long on Sloane. "No signs of forced entry. Which means someone in this room or someone with access to your private codes took them." The room went into a tailspin. Dominic turned his fury on me. You did this to spite me. You stole the diamonds to fund your little rebellion." "I don't need diamonds to destroy you, Dominic," I retorted, my heart racing. "This wasn't part of my plan. I had invited Jordan for leverage, but the diamonds? That was a move I hadn't anticipated." Suddenly, Sloane stood up, her voice trembling with a fake high-pitched fragility. "It was him. It was the guest. Jordan. He's a criminal, I told you. He probably broke in during the night." Jordan finally looked up, a cold, amused smile playing on his lips. "Careful, Shelby. Making false accusations to an insurance investigator is a felony. Especially when your fingerprints are still fresh on the vault's keypad." "You lie." Sloane screamed, but she began backing away toward the door. In that moment the power shifted. The Mistress wasn't just a homewrecker, she was a catalyst for a much larger heist. But before anyone could move, Ethan Hunt stepped between Sloane and the exit. "Nobody leaves this house. I've been authorized to lock down the estate until the gems are recovered. And Mr. Toretto, I should mention, the diamonds were insured by a company that specializes in high-risk fraud. They don't just want the stones back. They want blood." The inciting incident had been triggered. The hunt for the diamonds had begun, but the stakes were no longer just about a failed marriage or an affair. We were all trapped in a gilded cage with a thief, a hunter, and a husband whose world was collapsing. I looked at Jordan, trying to read his expression. Had he taken them? Or was he playing a deeper game to force Sloane into a corner? The mystery was deepening and the danger was becoming physical. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Jordan. "Trust the process, Elena," he whispered. "The truth always comes out in the dark." Dominic looked at us, his eyes wild with the realization that he was no longer the master of his own domain. "Lock the doors," he croaked to Alfred. "Nobody leaves until I get my life back." Little did he know his life was already gone. The lockdown turned the Toretto mansion into a pressure cooker. Outside, the iron gates were shuttered and the high-security perimeter hummed with a lethal current. Inside, the four of us were ghosts haunting our own lives. Ethan Hunt, the investigator, had set up a temporary command center in the library, his eyes never leaving the security monitors. Dominic was unraveling. He spent the afternoon pacing the length of the gallery, his phone held to his ear as he barked orders at lawyers who couldn't help him. The pension fund scandal Jordan had hinted at was a noose tightening around his neck, and the missing Cullinan tears were the stool being kicked out from under him. I found myself in the conservatory, the glass walls offering a view of the freedom I couldn't reach. The scent of jasmine was overwhelming, cloying in the heat of the afternoon sun. "You shouldn't be alone right now, Elena," a voice rumbled behind me. I didn't turn. I knew the sound of those footsteps. Jordan walked up beside me, his presence a strange blend of comfort and looming threat. For a moment we stood in silence, the history between us. A debt I had owed him since my early 20s when he'd helped me escape a different kind of monster, vibrated in the air. "Did you take them, Jordan?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "The diamonds." He looked out at the garden, his jaw set. "I'm many things, Elena, but I'm not a common thief. I'm here for what Sloane, or Shelby as she was known in the underground circuits of Macau, stole from me 5 years ago. It wasn't jewelry. It was lives. She was the inside woman for a heist that went blood red. I've spent half a decade tracking her. Seeing her here in your home, playing the innocent mistress to your pathetic husband? It's a poetic kind of justice. As he spoke, he stepped closer. The tension between us wasn't just about the mystery. It was a dormant spark that had been suppressed for a decade. He reached out, his thumb grazing the line of my jaw. You've spent too long being a shadow, Elena. It's time you stepped into the light, even if that light is a fire. The moment was shattered by a crash from the hallway. We ran toward the sound to find Dominic standing over a shattered vase, his face purple with rage. He had intercepted Sloane trying to sneak into the kitchen with a packed bag. Where were you going? Dominic roared, grabbing her by the wrist. You're staying right here until I find out what you've done with my family's legacy. Let me go, Dominic. You're hurting me. Sloane shrieked, her eyes darting toward the basement door. It was a classic red herring. She wanted us to look down to think she had stashed the gems in the cellar. But as she struggled, a small silver key fell from the hidden pocket of her robe. It didn't look like a house key. It looked like a key to a high-end locker. What is that? I asked, stepping forward. Sloane lunged for it, but Ethan Hunt was faster. He stepped out of the shadows, his expression unreadable as he pocketed the key. This isn't for the vault. This is for a transit station across town. Interesting thing to keep in your pocket when you're supposed to be coexisting in a mansion. I've never seen that before. Sloane cried, her voice cracking with a desperate lie. Elena must have planted it on me. She's trying to frame me so she can have Jordan all to herself. The accusation was absurd, but I saw the seed of doubt in Dominic's eyes. He wanted to believe I was the villain. It was easier for his ego to believe his wife was a mastermind than to admit his mistress was a professional grifter. As the sun began to set, casting long bloody shadows across the foyer, the atmosphere shifted from suspicion to outright hostility. Every glance was a weapon. Every word was a trap. I realized then that Sloane wasn't just afraid of Jordan's past. She was terrified of what was in the safe deposit box that key belonged to. It wasn't just diamonds. It was the leverage she was using to keep Dominic under her thumb. I retreated to the kitchen to find a moment of peace, but instead I found a note tucked under my tea saucer. The husband knows more than he's saying. Look at the ledger in the floorboard of the study. Alfred. My silent ally was still watching. I made my way toward the study, my heart pounding in my throat. I had to move fast. If Dominic caught me, the game was over. But as I reached for the handle, I heard a low, muffled conversation from inside. It was Dominic's voice, and he wasn't talking to a lawyer. I don't care what it takes, he hissed into the phone. If the investigator finds out the diamonds were never in the vault to begin with, we're both dead. Make sure the accident is ready for tonight. My blood ran cold. The diamonds were already gone? And who was he talking to? I backed away from the door, but the floorboard creaked beneath my feet. The talking inside stopped instantly. Elena. Dominic's voice called out, cold and sharp as a razor. Is that you? The hunter was now the hunted. I didn't breathe. I pressed my back against the cold mahogany of the hallway wall, my heart hammering like a trapped bird. The handle of the study turned, but before Dominic could step out, a loud crash echoed from the east wing, the sound of shattering glass and a woman's piercing scream. Dominic bolted toward the noise, forgetting me for a split second. I seized the opportunity. I slipped into the study, the air heavy with the scent of his expensive cigars and old rotting secrets. I dove for the corner of the rug, peeling it back to reveal the loose floorboard Alfred had mentioned. My fingers caught the edge, prying it up to find a heavy leather-bound ledger and a small digital recording device. I grabbed them both and ducked behind the heavy velvet curtains just as footsteps returned. But it wasn't Dominic. It was Jordan. You have it, he whispered, stepping into the room and closing the door softly. What is this, Jordan? I held the ledger like it was a live grenade. The truth about the Cullinan tears, he said, his eyes dark. Open it. I flipped to the last page. My breath hitched. There were high-resolution photos of the diamonds, but they were dated 3 years ago, marked as sold, private auction Zurich. Dominic sold the family diamonds years ago to cover his first major loss in the pension fund. I whispered, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. The ones in the vault. The ones that were stolen tonight. Our glass. Jordan finished. High-quality fakes. Dominic staged the robbery tonight to claim the $15 million insurance payout. It was his last-ditch effort to replace the money he stole from his employees before the auditors arrived. But he didn't count on Sloane. What do you mean? Sloane isn't just his mistress, Elena. She's a professional blackmailer. She knew the diamonds in the vault were fake because she's the one who helped him source the replicas 3 years ago. She's been draining him dry ever since. But tonight she realized Dominic was planning to pin the theft on her to get rid of his debt and his mistress in one move. Suddenly, the digital recorder in my hand flickered to life. I pressed play. A voice filled the room. It was Sloane's, but she sounded different. Brash. Dangerous. You think you're the only one with a plan, Dominic? I have the real ledger. I have the recordings of you authorizing the pension transfer. If I go down for the diamonds, I'm taking the whole Toretto empire with me. And don't worry about Elena. I've already made sure she won't be a problem. The shattering glass from earlier hadn't been an accident. It was a signal. Elena, look out. Jordan lunged for me just as the study door was kicked open. It wasn't Dominic. It was Ethan Hunt, the investigator. But he wasn't holding a badge anymore. He was holding a silenced pistol, and his eyes were as cold as the North Sea. The ledger, Elena, Ethan said, his voice devoid of emotion. Hand it over. Sloane and I have a plane to catch, and we can't have you or Mr. Belfort testifying at the insurance hearing. The betrayal was total. The investigator was Sloane's partner. They weren't just here for the diamonds. They were here to strip the Toretto legacy bare and leave a trail of bodies behind. Dominic had brought a mistress into our home, but he had actually invited an assassin and a thief who were far more capable than he ever was. You're not an investigator, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I'm a closer, Ethan replied, stepping into the room. And this case is about to be closed for good. The stakes had reached the ceiling. It wasn't just my marriage on the line, it was our lives. We were trapped in a room with a man who killed for a living, while my husband was likely being dealt with elsewhere. Jordan stepped in front of me, his body a human shield. You're going to have to go through me first, Ethan. And I promise you, I'm much harder to kill than a pension fund. The air crackled with lethal intent. The coexistence was over. The war had begun. The click of the safety being disengaged on Ethan's pistol was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It echoed in the small study, a final punctuation mark on the life I used to know. The man I thought was an investigator, the man I thought would bring justice, was nothing more than a wolf in a tailored suit. Jordan, move, Ethan commanded, his voice a low, dangerous hum. You've spent 5 years chasing this woman. Don't make this the night you finally catch a bullet for her sins. It's not for her, Jordan replied, his muscles coiled like a spring. It's for the debt I owe a friend. Suddenly the lights in the mansion flickered and died. Total darkness swallowed the room. In that split second of confusion, Jordan lunged. I heard the thud of bodies hitting the floor, the grunt of exhaled breath, and the terrifying clatter of a weapon sliding across the hardwood. Elena, run. Jordan roared. I didn't think. I scrambled toward the door, my hands trembling as I fumbled for the handle. I burst into the hallway, but the house was a labyrinth of shadows. Emergency red lights pulsed along the baseboards, casting a ghoulish, rhythmic glow over the family portraits. I made it halfway to the grand staircase when a hand clamped over my mouth, dragging me into the linen closet. I prepared to fight, to scream, to bite, until I smelled the familiar faint scent of peppermint and floor wax. Quiet, madam, Alfred whispered, his voice shaking. They've taken Mr. Toretto to the wine cellar. Sloane, she's not who we thought. She has men outside. Not security. Mercenaries. Where is Jordan? I gasped, pulling his hand away. Still in the study, fighting for his life, Alfred said. He pressed a heavy, cold object into my hand. It was the master key to the estate's electrical override. The house is on total lockdown. Even their communications are jammed now. But they are looking for the ledger. If they get it, none of us leave this house alive. My heart plummeted. I looked through the slats of the closet door and saw Sloane walking down the hall. She wasn't the trembling mistress anymore. She held a tactical flashlight in one hand and a jagged glass shard in the other, her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. Elena, she called out, her voice echoing through the empty halls. I know you can hear me. Give me the ledger and I'll make sure your death is quick. Hide it and I'll let Ethan have his fun with you first. I felt a wave of cold despair wash over me. I was trapped. My husband was a hostage in his own cellar. The man who had come to save me was potentially bleeding out in the study, and my only ally was an elderly butler. For the first time, the weight of the Toretto name felt like a tombstone. Everything I had worked for, the dignity I had tried to maintain, the hope of a fresh start, felt like it was slipping through my fingers. I was alone in the dark, hunted by a woman who had already stolen my husband and was now coming for my soul. I thought of the positive resolution I had prayed for. Was this it? A cold closet and a silent prayer? Then I heard a wet, hacking cough from the study, followed by the sound of something heavy being dragged. My stomach turned. Was that Jordan? Or had Ethan won? I'm coming for you, Elena, Sloane whispered, her footsteps stopping right outside the closet door. The beam of her flashlight sliced through the slats, illuminating my terrified eyes for a fraction of a second. The handle of the closet door began to turn, the slow, agonizing creak of metal against metal sounding like a death knell. I gripped the master key, my knuckles white, and prepared for the end. The door creaked open, but I didn't wait for the light to hit my face. As the sliver of silver light widened, I didn't shrink back, I lunged. I slammed the full weight of my body against the door, catching Sloane off guard. The heavy wood struck her shoulder with a sickening thud, and she tumbled backward into the hallway, her flashlight skittering across the marble floor. You little mouse, she spat, clutching her arm, her face contorted in a snarl. But I wasn't a mouse anymore. The terror that had paralyzed me for years had finally hardened into a diamond-sharp resolve. I grabbed the flashlight, the heavy metal casing feeling like a mace in my hand. The mouse is tired of the trap, Sloane, I said, my voice steady and cold. From the study, a staggering figure emerged. It was Jordan. He was leaning against the doorframe, blood trickling from a cut on his temple, but he was upright. Behind him, Ethan Hunt lay slumped on the floor, unconscious. Jordan had used the darkness to turn the professional killer's own momentum against him. Elena, Jordan wheezed, a small, triumphant smile tugging at his lips. The key, the override. I realized then what I had to do. This house was a smart mansion, a fortress designed by Dominic to keep people out, but it could also be a cage to keep people in. I dashed toward the main terminal in the foyer, my fingers flying across the keypad. I didn't just turn on the lights. I initiated the intruder protocol I had memorized years ago during a security briefing I wasn't supposed to be paying attention to. A low, vibrating hum filled the house. High-tensile steel shutters began to drop over every window and door. The mansion was now a tomb. What are you doing? Sloane screamed, scrambling to her feet. You're locking us in with him. Ethan will wake up. No, I replied, staring her down. I'm locking you in with me. And the police are already on their way. I triggered the silent alarm the moment the shutters dropped. Sloane's bravado vanished. She looked at the steel-plated exits and then at Jordan, who was slowly closing the distance between them. She was a grifter who thrived on exits and shadows, and I had just taken both away from her. But the real turning point wasn't the security system. It was the realization that I held the power all along. I reached into my suit jacket and pulled out the digital recorder. I have the confession, Sloane. I have the ledger. And I have the proof that Dominic sold the real diamonds years ago. You're not leaving with a fortune. You're leaving in handcuffs. Just then, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the basement stairs. Alfred appeared, guiding a disheveled, terrified Dominic. My husband looked at me, truly looked at me, and for the first time I saw respect in his eyes, shadowed by a profound, pathetic shame. Elena, save me, he whispered. I'm saving myself, Dominic, I said, turning my back on him to face the woman who tried to ruin me. And I'm saving the people you robbed. The momentum had shifted completely. We weren't victims waiting for a resolution. We were the ones dictating the end of the story. Jordan reached my side, his hand squeezing my shoulder. The heat of the conflict was still there, but the ice of despair had melted into the fire of justice. I looked at the monitors. Blue and red lights were already reflecting off the iron gates outside. The end was near, but I had one final move to make before the curtain fell. The heavy thud of the police battering ram against the steel-reinforced outer gates vibrated through the floorboards. But inside the foyer, the air was deadly still. Ethan Hunt had regained consciousness, his eyes flickering open with a predatory sharpness. He didn't reach for his gun. He knew the house was now a cage of my making. Instead he stood slowly, adjusting his tactical vest with a chilling calmness. "You've made a mistake, Elena," Ethan said, his voice echoing in the vast space. "Locking the doors doesn't keep the monster out. It keeps you in with him." Sloane lunged for the fallen glass shard again, her eyes wild. "Give me the ledger, Elena. If I'm going down, I'm carving the truth out of your throat." She sprinted toward me, but she was stopped mid-stride. Not by Jordan and not by the police. Dominic, driven by a sudden desperate urge to redeem himself, or perhaps just to save his own skin, threw himself in her path. They collided, a mess of silk and fury. Dominic pinned her arms, but Sloane was a cornered viper. She drove her heel into his shin and bit down on his hand, breaking free and diving toward the console where the ledger lay. "Jordan!" I screamed. Jordan didn't hesitate. Despite his injuries, he moved with the precision of the trained operative he had once been. He intercepted Sloane, catching her wrist in midair. But as they struggled, Ethan made his move. He didn't go for the women, he went for the terminal. He was going to override the lockdown and escape before the perimeter was breached. I realized then that the ledger wasn't the only piece of evidence. I had the digital recorder, yes, but the real power lay in the live feed. "Alfred, now!" I shouted. The giant screens in the foyer, usually reserved for displaying priceless digital art, suddenly flickered to life. But they didn't show art. They showed the live security footage from the vault 3 years ago, the night Dominic had swapped the real diamonds for glass. And then the screen split, showing the footage from 10 minutes ago, Ethan and Sloane discussing their plan to murder us all and flee to South America. I had piped the internal feed directly to the local precinct's mobile command unit. "The whole world is watching, Ethan," I said, my voice ringing out with a power I didn't know I possessed. "There is no escape. Not for the mistress, not for the hitman, and not for the husband." Ethan froze. He looked at the screen, seeing his own face framed by the crimes he had committed. For the first time, the closer looked defeated. He dropped his hands. Sloane let out a blood-curdling scream of pure frustration. "No. I was supposed to be a Toretto. I was supposed to have it all." "You were never a Toretto," I said, walking toward her as Jordan held her back. "You were just a shadow in my house. And shadows disappear when the light comes on." The front doors finally groaned under the pressure, the steel bolts shearing off as the tactical team burst through. "Police! Hands in the air!" The room erupted into motion. Officers swarmed the foyer, pinning Ethan to the floor and zip-tying Sloane's hands behind her back. Dominic sat on the bottom step of the grand staircase, his head in his hands, finally realizing that the empire he had lied to build was gone. As they led Sloane away, she stopped in front of me, her eyes burning with a hollow, dying fire. "You think you won, Elena? You're left with nothing. No husband, no money, no home." I looked around at the cold marble and the shattered glass. "I was left with nothing the day I married him, Sloane. Today is the first day I actually own my life." Jordan walked over, his breathing heavy, his shirt stained with blood and grime. He looked at the chaos, then at me. "You did it, Elena. You played the hand I gave you and you won the whole damn table." The triumph wasn't in the arrests or the recovered fake gems. It was in the silence that followed. The house was finally quiet. The mistress was gone, the assassin was caught, and the husband was exposed. Justice hadn't just been served. It had been carved out of the wreckage of a decade of lies. The police led the last of them out, and for the first time in years I felt like I could take a breath that didn't hurt. 6 months later, the air was crisp and smelled of salt and wild lavender. I stood on the deck of a modest, sun-drenched villa overlooking the Amalfi Coast, a far cry from the cold, imposing marble of the Toretto estate. The mansion in the city had been seized and liquidated to pay back the thousands of employees Dominic had defrauded. He was currently serving a 15-year sentence for white-collar crime and insurance fraud. Sloane and Ethan were facing even longer stretches in a federal facility. I held a glass of chilled white wine, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of violet and gold. I had lost the wealthy life, but I had gained a soul. With the help of the whistleblower reward and a small private settlement Jordan had facilitated through his venture firm, I had opened a foundation dedicated to helping women escape abusive and controlling marriages. My service was no longer to a man who didn't see me, but to a world that needed me. A door creaked open behind me. Jordan stepped onto the deck, looking far more relaxed in a linen shirt than he ever did in his tactical suits. He leaned against the railing, his blue eyes reflecting the fading light. "The Foundation's first headquarters in New York is officially open as of this morning," he said, handing me a small folder. "The board is asking when the founder is coming back for the ribbon cutting." I smiled, feeling a genuine warmth spread through my chest. "Soon." I'm enjoying the silence for a little while longer. Our relationship hadn't been a whirlwind romance born of trauma. It was something deeper. It was a slow-burning trust built on mutual respect and a shared history of survival. We didn't need to rush. For the first time in my life, I wasn't running from anything and I wasn't waiting for permission to exist. "You know," Jordan said, looking out at the sea, "Sloane's lawyers tried to file for an appeal last week. They claimed emotional distress during the lockdown." I laughed, a light, free sound that didn't feel heavy with irony. "Let them. They can coexistence with their cellmates. I'm busy living." Alfred, who had retired with a generous pension I ensured he received, had sent me a postcard yesterday from his travels in Japan. He was finally seeing the world he had only read about in Dominic's library. Everyone was where they were meant to be. The cycle of betrayal had been broken, replaced by a legacy of recovery and hope. As the stars began to peek through the twilight, I realized that the mysterious guest I had invited into my home that night hadn't just been my revenge. He had been the catalyst for my rebirth. I was no longer the wife, the victim, or the shadow. I was Elena, and for the first time that was more than enough. I want to thank you all for being part of this incredible journey. This story reminds us that no matter how dark the house feels, you always have the power to turn on the light. If you've enjoyed this 40-minute emotional ride, please leave a comment with your favorite moment. I read every single one. And if you haven't already, click that subscribe button and hit the bell icon. We have so many more stories of justice, love, and redemption to tell. Thank you for watching, and remember, your ending is yours to write. I turned back to the view, the future stretching out before me like the endless horizon. The game was over. I had won.